Welcome to the Firstville. My name is Katie Meyer, and I serve as the Senior Director of Content Creation at APHA. This month, we did something a little bit different and provided visiting resident Bobby Christophilus the opportunity to interview our subject matter expert. He chose the topic of regulatory and reimbursement pathways for digital therapeutics and welcomed guest Andy Molnar, the CEO of Digital Therapeutics Alliance, the opportunity to speak on the topic. This podcast was recorded in Nashville at APHA 2025. So with that, I'll let Bobby take it away.
All right. Can you start by introducing yourself and sharing how you broke into the digital health space and what you and your team do over at the Digital Health Therapeutics Alliance for our listeners who might not be familiar with the organization?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me. I'm Andy Molnar. I'm the CEO of the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. I'm also an advisor on the FDA's Digital Health Advisory Committee. I broke into digital health when I first heard about paratherapeutics back in 2017. I had a friend who worked there, and I thought that was the future of medicine. And so I applied for a job, and the rest is history.
Really cool.
Now, what we focus on with my team, and this sort of stemmed from what we started at paratherapeutics, was building the infrastructure for an industry, right? We started government affairs and lobbying work with CMS to have proper coding and coverage. And that evolved into my passion for creating the baseline for this industry, which is at the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, we specifically focus on policy work and legislative work and bringing stakeholders together to drive things forward. Because truly, people say it a lot, but it is true that a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's the way I look at this.
So in our part one, we kind of talked a little bit about the primary regulatory pathways, okay, de novo, and then also the different classes of approval for digital therapeutics. Can you give us kind of a brief overview of those and maybe dive into some examples that you've seen in practice?
Sure. From a regulatory perspective, if you're used to medical devices, it does act very similarly, right? So if you're familiar with the de novo process and the 510K process, that is the same. There are only a few class 3 devices because those are riskier, right? So there's, I believe, a product that affects your insulin pump. And so if that doesn't work, that can cause major issues. So that is higher risk. Typically, we see things come through as class 2. We also see quite a few products go through the enforcement discretion pathway, which I didn't see listed here. Some of the products and the FDA states this on their website too. If it's like mindfulness and meditation, that is not something that you're going to want to put through the FDA. So that falls either under enforcement discretion or outside of regulation entirely.
So could you share some of the most common reimbursement pathways pharmacists and digital health innovators should be aware of, particularly related to Medicaid, Medicare, and private insurance?
Sure. So in the last 6 months, we've had a couple really big advancements. The first one being in the 2025 physician fee schedule. CMS had put out codes within Medicare for the reimbursement of digital mental health treatment devices. These cover some of the earliest products like paratherapeutics, Reset and Reset-O for substance use disorder, as well as Sleepio and Somrist for insomnia, and a product for major depressive disorder called Rejoin. It's a really great advancement because we can start showing utilization in the real world and collect real world evidence with patients. We also talk a lot about prescription drug use related software, or PDURS, which is a guidance put out by the FDA where digital therapeutics can accompany drugs. I actually think this will have one of the biggest impacts on pharmacists. And I was talking to Pharmacopoeia earlier and how it kind of cleans up the reimbursement pathway to make that similar to the way that drugs are paid for. Now, we also have people using the durable medical equipment pathway, which makes a lot of sense. A lot of these digital devices also have that hardware component that makes it fall under DME. And we also have the codes with the American Medical Association related to RTM and RPM and working to advance those. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is, if you were to ask me that question 3 years ago, I'd give you a lot of vague answers and saying, we could try this, we could try this, we could try this. And now that's become a lot more reality, where what makes sense for your business model as a company, you can say, this is the pathway I want to go down. Now, there are still gaps within that. It kind of sounds like I've covered everything. There's still gaps within some of those pathways. But Now you can choose your business model that makes sense for that. Whereas before it was like, let's choose the only pathway possible. And so now it's opened up, and it's really is a completely different world in 2025 because of these codes coming out and this new guidance from the FDA.
Kind of moving a little bit further along, what are some challenges that you might see going forward, especially given the complexity around reimbursement? Like any challenges that you might see for pharmacists, specifically those breaking into the digital therapeutic space? What do you think that they might face in the future?
Well, I think the biggest problems right now are system issues, right?
Mhm.
So where we see pharmacists getting involved right now is in basically in specialty pharmacy, and especially pharmacy that does virtual type dispensation. The larger retail chains, this isn't quite big enough for them to invest the money to train every single one of their pharmacists. It doesn't necessarily sound that complex to you and I when we're sitting here, but when you think of, okay, what if a patient comes to a pharmacy and doesn't know how to download an app? Pharmacists aren't really trained for that. And so there is quite a lot of training that has to come into play. So if you're CVS or you're Walgreens, right, um, you're gonna you have to put quite a lot of investment into that space. And so with that, a lot of these products have gone to either get, or these companies have either licensed to dispense medical devices themselves, or have partnered with specialty pharmacies. So the pharmacists that are currently like really have their hands around this are more in the specialty space, even though this doesn't quite feel like a specialty product. It's a unique dispensation, and so it has to go through a workflow that is not designed specifically for individual products.
Interesting.
And that'll evolve very quickly over time because we see what they're doing in Europe and in Asia.
Could you share some kind of practical examples or strategies that have helped pharmacists or anyone really to successfully overcome these reimbursement challenges kind of here in the US?
Yeah. So, I was thinking with the last question more about how the pharmacists are involved in the process, but the reimbursement complexity, any pharmacist that is used to billing on the medical benefit it's a very complex process even for drugs. Right? So if you're doing your typical like statin and things like that where you're dispensing it, that's all set. Issues that we have faced in the past is that because the coding infrastructure isn't quite built out yet for a lot of these products, and insurance companies are still working with how they want to cover these products, whether it be on a new benefit or covered under the pharmacy benefit or something else, is that the pharmacist will bill, and you don't get that real time benefits verification that we're used to. It may take time, a week, even a month, to find out if the patient has coverage. And so with that, I think the hardest part is particularly because the pharmacist sits between the patient and the insurance company, trying to explain that to the patient and ensuring that they understand that this product is going to help them, but it may not, but they can't dispense it to them right now because they don't know how much their copay is going to be. That coding aspect that I work so hard to streamline is certainly getting in the way of this being streamlined for pharmacists.
That could definitely be.
And I cannot fix that overnight.
Yeah, more of a long-term issue for sure. So with that, if moving, long-term goals, with that in mind, kind of moving into the future, how do you see the regulatory and reimbursement landscape for digital therapeutics evolving over the next couple of years? You said that you could see it getting bigger, but kind of expand on that a little bit. Tell me more.
Sure. So we're once again seeing the PBMs look into creating their formularies for digital health products. We saw this happen about, I want to say 5-6 years ago now as well, but it wasn't necessarily focused on the clinically validated and FDA regulated products. They were looking at those products that were like a step up from mobile health, maybe had some clinical validation, but weren't making claims. And now I think we're seeing all of those organizations move towards the clinically validated digital therapeutics. And so we'll see that evolve. But again, I'll bring up PDURS, the prescription drug use related software, which will allow digital therapeutics to be dispensed alongside drugs. And we'll start seeing expansion of the various CPT and HCPCS codes to kind of start to fill in those gaps. But what we really need is for the people that are really putting these products on the ground to push. We want to get these products into the hands of patients. We need these real practical examples to make cases to CMS. And so with these new mental health codes, we'll see that real world evidence that can allow us to put efforts forth to expand them into other areas outside of just mental health, or to even expand within mental health, because those codes, for example, don't cover issues with like GI issues and things like that are really triggered because of mental health issues. Irritable bowel syndrome, for example, is triggered through mental health. A lot of times triggered through anxiety, not every time, but there's products that treat that. There's products that treat fibromyalgia, and they aren't covered within these mental health treatment codes, even though they're mental health products.
Coming to the end of our time here, what kind of practical advice would you offer pharmacists who want to effectively advocate for better reimbursement for digital therapeutics in their practices?
Yeah, so the best thing they can do is work with the associations like APHA and the Digital Therapeutics Alliance and organizations like AdvaMed and the Consumer Technology Association and AMCP. And no, I love NCPDP, but they're good with workflow. They don't advocate on the Hill. But these trade associations that do lobby and work with Congress on their behalf is the best way to move these things forward, as well as, of course, the provider associations like the American Psychological Association. Those are the folks that are going to really stand up for the industry on Capitol Hill. So if you're going to say, hey, we all need this to move forward, so that makes sense, APHA, APA, the American Academy of Pediatrics, AAP, right? You need to get them all involved. It's not something that, I think a standard pharmacist would be just ready to do in their spare time, because it's a lot of work. So the best thing is to kind of have your voice be heard in these large groups like we have right here at this conference.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on the first fill. Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
The durable medical equipment pathway is also an option for reimbursement for digital products for pharmacists. Historically, payers have not focused on clinically validated digital products within formulary development. Due to evolving options for clinical validation, payers are now focusing more on payment for clinically validated products specifically. Prescription drug use related software is also an evolving option, which will allow digital therapeutics to be dispensed alongside drugs, which will likely lead to an expansion of billing codes for reimbursement. Pharmacists looking to advocate for reimbursement should work with APHA, the Digital Therapeutic Alliance, and others to assist with moving forward legislation related to billing. And that's all I have for today. If you haven't listened to part 1 of this month's First Fill podcast yet, it was released last week. In that episode, we highlighted the Digital Therapeutic Alliance's breakdown of digital regulatory and reimbursement pathways. Be sure to check it out. And finally, don't forget to visit the Learning Library at learn.pharmacist.com to earn CE for this month's podcast. Take care, and thanks so much for listening.